Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 104. We have a few more days until the deadline for this year's MyLife Chassidus Applied essay contest. So I encourage you to use these last few days, which ends in February 24th, later this week, to submit your essay. The guidelines can be found with all the details at meaningfullife.com/contest. And we're all excited to be reading and evaluating and reviewing the essays. We have a whole board of judges lined up specially for this. And what can I say? It's a tremendous schus and merit to be involved in such a project, which really is creating buzz and excitement all over from different age groups, schools, men, women, each applying themselves to learn an inyan Chassidus, a concept, and applying it to an issue in life. So please, if you haven't done so yet, I encourage you still have a few days to participate and win that $10,000 first prize, $3,600 second prize, and $1,000 third prize. Again, the details are at meaningfullife.com/contest. We'll begin with something that is man gram of the timely, as we always do, and that is that this week is Purim Katan, which is the title and the name used for Yud Daled Adar Rishon. And this year, this Shana Muber, is this leap year, which we've discussed last week and in previous episodes, has an extra Adar. So because Mismar Gula, the Gemara derives the fact that you want to join consecutive months redemption to redemption. So Purim, the full-blown Purim, as we know it, Purim Gadol, as the Alter Rebbe calls it, is in the second Adar. But nevertheless, being that the first Adar is also the 14th of Adar, is also the same, signifies and commemorates the same event, so it's called Purim Katan. Tachnun is not said, and there are other customs that relate to that. So there are many talks, not many, but I should say several talks that the Rebbe did give in relation to this, and one that I'd like to just briefly sum up in context of Chassidus Applied is the talk that he gave to the children, Tzivus Hashem, in the year 1981, Tavshin Mem Aleph. I had the schus to prepare it and write it, and the Rebbe edited it. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 21, page 339. And in the Rebbe's inimitable way takes the theme of the name Purim Katan. Every name is Hashgacha Pratis, is specific and precise. And what is the meaning of Katan? Of course, relates it to the Ketanim and Ketanes, which is the name for young boys and girls that are under Bar Mitzvah and Bat Mitzvah, Katan. But it's not just a word. There's a whole sugi in Gemara and Chulin that talks about David hu HaKatan, Yaakov hu HaKatan, Meirah HaKatan, refers to all the different entities that are called small, or Katan, young, small. So of course, we begin with the Meirah HaKatan, as the Torah talks about that God created on the fourth day the two great luminaries, Me'eres Agdelim, and then the moon came and complained. So God said, diminish yourself, and from then on it's called Meirah HaKatan, the small luminary. And you say Yaakov hu HaKatan. Yaakov is referred to as the small one. David is referred to as the small one. So it seems to be a derogatory term, small as opposed to large in magnitude. But however, as we learn there in the Gemara and we learn in Chassidus, Yisrael Deimim Levana, Jews are compared to the moon. They're not compared to the great luminary sun, which is larger and more powerful and brighter than the moon. They're compared to Deimim Levana and Meinan Levana. They're compared to, and they count by the moon. Why? Because the moon, in its own so-called diminished state, has a power that the greatest magnitude, the greatest firmament, greatest celestial bodies in the firmament don't have. Chassidus explains the moon is derived from the level of Malchus. Malchus, as the Zohar says, les la megarma klum. It does not have anything on its own. That's why it's called small. But by having nothing of its own, it has everything. Because it becomes a transparent receptacle, a transparent channel for Kesed Ihu Malchus, and means it connects all the way to Kesed, to the higher spheres, all the way up to Atzmus itself. Malchus is Noad Sefer B'Tchilos, and that is where the beginning is wedged in the end, and that's where the power of creation is possible. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Siman Chof, Epistle 20 in Hageres HaKedesh, that is the earth, Malchus, that has the power of vegetation, the Koyach Ein Sof, to give birth perpetually to vegetation, and also Malchus and Ruchnius is the feminine, which gives birth to the worlds of Biyah, and in our world it's the feminine that gives birth and carries and gives birth to the child. So Malchus, in its emptiness, so to speak, in its smallness, in its katnus, that's where the etzem itself radiates. And there's much talked about this in Chassidus, what exactly that means. The Rebbe has a chiddush, one of the chiddushim of the Rebbe, Tovshin Chofei, Pesach, Maimer, and later cited in the Sikh in Ekev and Chelik Tes, volume 9, and later came out also in a Maimer of that Maimer from Pesach that year, where the Rebbe says that it's not just because you can explain why is there, for example, Chassidus explains, in the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Betruni and B'Yesef Tofresh Memches from the Rebbe Rashab, and other Maimorim that talk about what part of the body do you put into hot water? The leg, the Malchus. Why? Because the mind and the heart and the higher parts of the body have many giluyim. So that's not where you begin. Put your leg, and where do you put the dafka, the pshitus, the simplicity, or that's what Chassidus calls the Kabbalah Sel, the Mesiras Nefesh of the Ish Pashut. Those are the front. These are the front line, as the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the Maimer Basaligani, the Anshe Chayil, the simple foot soldiers that go in the front line. But to them, they get bizbuz ha'etzes, they get the ultimate highest treasures, because the beginning is wedged in the end. But you can explain that because simply the mind and the higher faculties are so dominant and they radiate. So Giluyim, as Chassidus says, is mastir, it covers up on the etzem, because it's consumed with its own power, divine power, but so-called the divine ego, if you wish. Whereas Malchus, because of its simplicity, the leg, the foot, doesn't have any giluyim, doesn't have any faculties that are apparent, revealed faculties. So that's why it puts it in hot water. You put your foot into the hot water first. But that would only suggest, therefore, that Malchus is only because of its lack of higher giluyim. That's why it receives the core, the etzem. The Rebbe's mechada is from based on the Torah that the Malchus is actually a keli. Due to its simplicity, it's a keli, it's a container for etzem. Not just because it's just lacking giluyim. It has something in it that allows it to receive the etzem beyond the fact that it doesn't have the giluyim. You can look it up for more detail. But the point being that Purim Katan, as the Rebbe explains in this talk that he gave to the children, that Purim Katan signifies the power of katnus, the power of simplicity, the power of, precisely because it's small, because it doesn't have its full-bodied, full-dimensional body. That's why it draws down the highest powers. Malchus bringing down the highest powers. The Rebbe also cites the Maimer from Purim Katan as well, Tofresh Pei Zayin, the famous Maimer of Kibla Yehudim, that the Frierdiker Rebbe said in Moscow. And the Rebbe speaks about this in this Maimer and other places, the sakona that existed then. And the Frierdiker Rebbe of Kibla Yehudim spoke about the power of children, and that the Nekeshel Beis Rabbim and Ochaz was the one that was what he realized, Gedoyim Naset Yoshim, that when children will grow up, they will be the power. So he realized you have to close down their schools, which was what the communists and the Sexy were trying to do back then in Pei Zayin. Remember, that's the months before the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested. So he said this, Maimen Mepi'elim, he speaks about Mepi'elim v'yenkim yisad ta'ez, and the Rebbe in this Purim Katan cites that as well. So there again you see how the power of children, even though they don't have the weapons and they don't have the strength of adults and the physical strength, but their spiritual strength far outshines and has the power to reach in the deepest levels of etzem. And that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe was fighting for, to give that strength to the children, which was so much connected to the challenges back then in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and Tofresh Pei Zayin. The connection to Chassidus Applied is obvious. The concept of bittul, something we've talked about many times, that the greatest strength a person has is when they suspend themselves, because then you can become a channel for something greater than yourself. And frankly, that is the core essence of most problems are associated when you become bloated with yourself, a sense of self. So the sense of self, like the chassid that once told the Tzemach Tzedek, everyone's stepping over me when I come to shul. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to him, if you wouldn't spread yourself out over the whole shul, no one would step on you. When you're a mitzias is always going to be in the way, and can always be something that attracts all the different challenges that we have: fears, insecurities, jealousies, envy, anger, and so on. When a person senses that they're only a channel for something greater than they are, there's nothing there, there's no target for the negative forces to attach themselves to. So bittul is actually one of the most powerful forces of healing in every possible psychological, emotional, and spiritual way. And it's also obviously connected to this week's parsha, Sissa, the parsha of Machzis HaShekel. Why Machzis HaShekel? As Chassidus brings and explains, Machzis, that you have to feel that you're always half. You're not a complete entity. Without the Eibush to the second half, or without another Jew the second half, you're not complete. And that is the most complete possible thing when a person realizes that they're not a self-contained and full-blown entity of their own. The concept of the moon recognizing the Levana cotton, that it's small, that it has the ability to reflect and be transparent and to reflect something greater than itself. So bittul is a theme we've talked about many times. I don't need to go and elaborate further on it. We'll do that as we go along. It's always a recurrent theme of Chassidus. Bittul, of course, healthy form of bittul, not annihilation, not a skupa nedresses that you become a doormat, but on the contrary, a bittul meaning you become far greater than yourself because you're able to transcend yourself. In simple terms, when you stand in awe of anything, the birth of a child, getting married, any great simcha joy, or even a wondrous nature, the wonders of nature, that sense of awe is a sense of bittul to something, a presence that's higher than our own. And of course, in Chassidus, it's a fundamental theme. Ein Sof is defined by its bittul. As the Rebbe once said, bittul kenish bottle werden. Everything can become bottle. Everything can be annihilated. Everything can disappear. But disappearance can't disappear. When you are out of strength, suspending yourself to accept something greater than yourself, then you become open to everything, including an extension of the eternity itself, because you're bottled to it. Ego is going to give you as much as you can get. So you can be great, but it's only as much as you can be great. This opens up the door for you to be greater than you would be on your own. Okay, so that's some lessons from this week's time, and let's move into some questions, follow-up, and so on. Let's start with a follow-up about children. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson, and thanks for all that you do. I heard your answer to the question about the issue of Ben Seder and meirah, and I certainly appreciated the fact that you clearly stated that one should never give up on a child. You invited the listeners to give their take on the issue, which I have gave some thought. I think that on the contrary, the Torah was actually teaching us just that. In other words, the Torah was telling the parents, your kid may never change, so stop changing him. So many times the issues in parenting are about parents trying to change kids, and that's where they go wrong. So the Torah goes and says that this child will not change, yet the Torah does not allow the child to actually be killed. By this, the Torah was giving us a very clear message about not changing the child, rather working along with him, as the pasuk says, Chanech nar al pi darkei, which means to educate your child according to his way, meaning work with the child, not against him. If parents would only take this message of the Torah to heart and stop trying to change their children, rather give them the tools and the feeling and all the emotional and mental health that they so dearly need, things would certainly turn out different. And sometimes the only way the Torah can actually impress the parents enough is by saying, listen up, this kid is not changing, period. Thanks for the opportunity to share my feelings and thoughts. So though there is merit in this, and yet we have to also qualify and say, what about the fact that children have sometimes, as we all do, features or personality characteristics that need improvement, refinement, repression, harnessing. So to just suggest that just this is the kid and there's no change, I would not agree with that. And yet your point is well taken, and thank you for your comment. If any of you would like to make comments or ask questions or any other way to communicate with us totally anonymously, please go to our forum at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Okay. I want to add one more thing. I once heard a word, I'm not sure where the source is, that when Yaakov benched Ephraim and Menashe, so of course, Yosef put Ephraim to the right of Yaakov, so he should bless him with his right hand, being that he was the older one, and Ephraim to the left, and Yaakov crossed his hands. So there's the different explanations of Chassidus. Why couldn't he give Menashe the bracha? Because a bracha is not a tefillah. Bracha you can only give someone, you're only opening up a channel. Hamavrich, you're opening up the channel of that which Yaakov knew this person deserved. So he couldn't go and suddenly give it to someone else. All he can do is draw it down, Begili, Mehelam Elagili. So since Ephraim was the one that deserved the brachas he deserved, so Yaakov exchanged his hands crossed his hands in order to give Ephraim what he deserves. But there's another question that could be asked. Why didn't Yaakov simply move the order of the children? Should have moved Ephraim to the right, and Menashe to the left. And then the day it was clear that the bracha he gave to Ephraim was seemingly a greater bracha. So I once heard the word that you don't change your children, you change yourself. When you see children in a certain place, you figure out how to adjust to them instead of them having to adjust to you. Just thought it's a thought that's worth sharing. I'd also say that in the context of parenting and children, at the end of the day, children are a pekadon, a gift that God gives us. And that's what a parent has to always remember. One of the beautiful explanations of Akedas Yitzchak, which clearly Hashem didn't want of Yaakov to Avram to actually sacrifice Isaac. We see the end of the story. So the question is, why was the Havamina? Why did he even test him this way? Leaving open such controversial questions. So one of the beautiful explanations for this is because Avram Avinu had biological love for his child. Biological love of a human being is always going to be limited. The Eibishter wanted to infuse the biological love with divine love. Look how many of us as parents make mistakes, and in the name of our love, we could hurt our children. Hashem wanted to infuse our love with something that's even beyond our own nature, beyond our capacity. Because you could imagine that love, the love that Avram had afterwards when it went through that test. So the test was not a test. He says, bind Isaac and declare, who does your child belong to, me or to you? And then when it is your child, then it's infused with the child being mine. In other words, if there's a choice to be made, whether it's God's will or the parents' will, you have to always defer to God's will. Not the sacrifice per se, the binding. Akedah means to bind. And that's what God wanted to teach us. That we should, and then the love of the parents is infused with that bligvul love and unconditional love that is not limited and flawed as human biological love may be. So that the biological love becomes infused with the divine, infinite type of love, which is also can explain another story. They say that Rebbe Rashab, this famous story, that Rebbe Rashab was sitting with one of the Chassidim and he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe as a child sleeping, and he had the urge to go over and kiss him. Instead, he went down and wrote a meirah Chassidus, which he later gave to the Frierdiker Rebbe as a gift. That was the Chassidus Kush, it was called, the Chassidic kiss. So I always had the question, why couldn't he kiss him and also write the meirah? Here it can almost be suggested that it's better to just write the meirah and not to have a physical kiss. Don't children need the physical nurturing and kiss? So the obvious answer is because the intensity of the love, instead of doing it for a short-lived moment for a kiss, he infused it in the meirah, and the meirah would always be kissing the child. So it wasn't replacing a gashmizdika kiss, a ruchnizdika kiss. It was taking a limited and time-bound and short-lived kiss, which would only last for that moment, and giving him an eternal kiss that even when the Rebbe Rashab wouldn't be there, the gashmis, his son would always be kissed and hugged by the meirah that the Rebbe Rashab gave him. And this is also true with us. We have the Maimorim, the Sichos of the Rebbe, of the Rabbeim, and they continue to embrace us and kiss us with the love that they invested in writing these materials. Not just materials, anon nafshik savis Yehovahs, they invested their souls. The nefesh of the Rebbe is invested in the ksavim, in the writings, and they're given to us as a gift to be able to deal with every challenge in life. And hence the concept of MyLife Chassidus Applied, which is all a direct outgrowth of appreciating and respecting those thousands and thousands of hours of invested time that the Rabbeim gave us, this eternal kisses of love, and saying, here's a document, here's a doctrine, here is teachings that can change your life, that offer you answers to all your questions, as the Alter Rebbe says in the introduction to Tanya. Next, that's a good segue into the question. The crown jewel of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe's famous parable compares Chassidus to the crown jewel of the king, which has powerful healing properties. When the king's child falls ill, and all doctors have given up hope, a specialist recommends that the only antidote is a rare mineral, which they discover is found exclusively in the king's crown jewel, which when crushed and mixed with the water, there it says wine in the actual source, can serve as an elixir. Maybe I'm not pronouncing it right. Elixir, which is a healing agent to save the child's life. The king, of course, does not hesitate to sacrifice his crown jewel to save his child, because what does he need the crown and his whole kingship if he doesn't have his child? Though the entire crown's value is dependent on it. So too with Chassidus. Though it is the most precious jewel in the king's crown, the king offers it to save his spiritually comatose children of our day and age. The question. This analogy is good for convincing someone who hasn't learned Chassidus to learn it. What about those that are Torah-committed Jews? How does the parable apply to them? And what about those that have studied Chassidus in the finest yeshivas and then rejected these teachings? What is the crown jewel that could cure them from their spiritual illness? So another question came in that was similar. I'll have to read it because it's almost, the theme is exactly the same. So that's the question. So let's first go back to the sources, which is always the best way, as I've mentioned many times, and I try to live up to it myself. The best way to stay honest, the best way to stay grounded, is by connecting and grounding everything in sources. The first thing you see in all the sikhs of the Rebbe, even if before you learn them, is the multitude of meirah. Even Bereshis Aleph Aleph, which everyone knows, Genesis 1:1, Bereshis bara Elokim. Even that the Rebbe insisted that it be cited. As the Rebbe explains in the Fabrengen Tov Shem Aleph as well, Shabbos Bereshis, the first Fabrengen of Shabbos Bereshis. So sources also cause us to take away any type of controversial issue, diffuses it, and instead of it being an emotional, partisan-like argument, it's sources. What do the sources say? We have two opinions in interpreting the source. So it generally gives a certain level of sobriety, as I said, honesty and integrity when we connect our sources. So let's go to the source, besides, of course, the fact that when you look at the source, many questions are answered because you see the source, you see the context of what it was said, and often it qualifies its statement to help us understand it better. So this parable, if everyone knows the parable, what is the source for the parable? So the first source, I'm not necessarily in order of priority, but the source is, there's a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe in Igros Kodesh of the Rebbe Rayatz, it's Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, volume 3, page 326, where he elaborates on the story. Earlier it was printed in Hatomim, section 2, which means the second pamphlet of Hatomim, page 49 or 72a. Frierdiker Rebbe also shared this parable in a Fabrengen, which was actually this week, 88 years ago, I believe it is. Leil Shabbos Pasha Sissa, the 18th of Adar, so it's in Sefer HaSichos Tov Reish Peches. And this was in Atvotsk, after he had left Russia earlier that year, page 19. And the Rebbe explains this as well in a Sikha that he spoke. What year was it? The Sikha was Tavshim Mem Vov, Metzoy Shabbos Miketz, and Metzoy Zois Chanukah, Tavshim Mem Vov. And printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 30, page 170. So here are the sources. There are actually some differences when you compare it. I'm not going to go into a whole analysis here. That's for a different purpose, not Chassidus Applied. But briefly, especially in the letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's using the story to answer a question to someone who's asking the Frierdiker Rebbe whether Chassidus is for everyone. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, absolutely for everyone, and then brings the story, of course, the stories of Pinchas Koritzer, who had a kpeda and was against the shita of just spreading Chassidus to everyone because he felt it would be abused. And then it seemed to have actually been vindicated by the fact that there was actually found a blettel Chassidus of the Magid was found either someplace it says in the garbage, someplace it was just rolling around, and he had a kpeda, he was really upset, and that's when the Alter Rebbe gave this mashal. And later the Magid said to the Alter Rebbe, because of your mashal you saved me because you defended, the kpeda was on me. You defended, and to the extent that it says in some of the sources, that was one of the reasons, one of the two reasons the Alter Rebbe was zeicha by the Torah of the Magid after his istalkus to be given to the Goydel should fall that he was Matayar the Reish, Teres Reish of the Magid. The second reason given because he saved the Magid's son of Amalach from Kleis HaNefesh. But the first reason given is because of this. And he gave the mashal, and Pinchas Koritzer in one place says he actually smiled and he accepted the example. The example, of course, is of the child that falls ill, And even though it's only a suffix, because his illness gets even worse, it's only a doubt that it will save him. Maybe one drop will get between his clenched teeth of the crushed crown jewel of the king. The king has no question, and he immediately orders it to be done. In one place it says he doesn't immediately order, but again, I'm not going to go through the changes, the different shinuyim from place to place. And that's why the Friedrich Rebbe says, in answering your question, what's the point to pour out Chassidus with no purpose? You're making a mistake in these two things. First, that you say that Chassidus is only for Chassidim. That's not true. Very sharp lashon. You're making a mistake. You're making a mistake saying that Chassidus is only for Chassidim. Loikein. That's not the way it is. Chassidus is b'shvil hanashamas. Chassidus is for the souls. And there's a neshama in each individual Jew. So for neshamas, that's what it is. It's for everyone. And Beis, Masha Omer Lelei Te'elis. You're saying that Chassidus doesn't have a Te'elis. He says you're making a mistake there too. The words of Chassidus, every moment and in every place, it brings benefit. And if even for that hour or that moment, you don't see the benefit, you'll see it in time. What stronger statement do you need about Chassidus itself? And then he goes on, the Friedrich Rebbe, to tell the long story in Barichas, almost 2-3 pages here, on about the mashal of the Alter Rebbe with the Keser Melech. Yeah, 3 pages. And then the Friedrich Rebbe concludes, HaSipur HaKodesh HaLazeh, this holy story, Madgish emphasizes the mistake, your mistake in the 2 matters that I mentioned earlier. And because Be'emes Teis Chassidus is B'shvil HaKol, Chassidus is for everybody, and brings Te'elis L'Kol, and brings benefit to everyone. And even, God forbid, someone's a Chela Mesukan, which means an ill person who's in danger, Le'aleinu. But if his lips, Nidbuku Mebli L'Kabel Mu'uma, and his lips are sealed in a way that he may not receive anything, you have to make every effort that maybe something will enter through his lips, even one drop, and then the hope is that he'll be completely healed from his illness. But this still doesn't tell us the answer to the question that was asked, what about those that are not comatose? So obviously it's very clear, and especially when you look in the Sikha in Chilik Lamed, that Sikha from Matzoy Mekates and Chanek Zeis Chanek Tov Shalamed Vov, in volume 30 in Likutei Sichos, it's very clear there. He brings a second reason why Chassidus was revealed, not just for the Chil Mesukan. The other reason given also brought in Likutei Sichos Chilik Tezvov, 15, volume 15, and other places, because it's a taste and achana to the Geula. And there, that's for everybody. That's not just for people who are comatose, because La'asad Lavu Mashiach comes, everybody, Lo Yi'esa Kol Elam, El L'Dasas Hashem Bolvad. There will be no other preoccupation except to know God, to learn Chassidus, Mala Aras Deis Hashem, and the Jews will be Chachom and Nevenim as the Rambam paskins at the ends of Hilchas Malachim. So that alone, that reason therefore is for everybody. That's one point. Another point he brings there in the Likutei Sichos on page 175. He actually, Bavaran, the Rebbe says that even someone who thinks that Primis HaTeirah, especially Eif V'chad, is not necessary for his survival, because in his opinion, his spiritual life is not in sakana, not in danger, and therefore he only needs to learn Nigla de Teirah or Musar and so on. Nevertheless, how can he free himself, the Rebbe says, from the obligation, the Psak Din Baran Halacha, in Niglan, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that every Nefesh Misrael has to learn Kol HaTeirah Kula, which includes the Primis HaTeirah. Nister. That's one point. In addition, and this is even a more important point, we are all, no matter who we are, in a state of a comatose state. Even if someone was blessed and brought up in a Shem Torah Mitzvah family, and therefore can argue they're not a Chela Mesukan, they're not dangerous, they're not ill, in a comatose state, the fact of the matter is, today we suffer from another malady which is called mechanical Judaism. You could have cultural Judaism. And without Chassidus, the passion, the pnimius, the ava v'yira, as the Rebbe Rashab explains Arichas at length in Kuntus Eitz Chaim, why you need Chassidus, So just to say that it's only for people who don't know anything about Yiddishkeit, we all are in need of this type of vitality and this type of passion. And when it comes down to it, Tanya is not just for so-called ill, meaning ill in the sense of people who are comatose and have no awareness of God. It could be even more important for people who have awareness of God but become comfortable with it. Mitzvahs anoshim ulamoda, where they just do it by rote, mechanically. And the korav elecha dover me'ei, that relevance of finding a personal, passionate connection that is psychologically and emotionally and spiritually stimulating and alive. B'chol yem yeh b'chadoshim, that mitzvahs are done with a fresh vitality, is not possible without Chassidus. And in fact, therefore, that when the Baal Shem Tov first began to reveal Chassidus, he was speaking only to Shem L'Teirah mitzvahs. The concept of a tinnik shenishba, a child that's born in captivity, Jews that are assimilated, is a relatively more modern concept from then. Even though it began then and it could have existed even that time of the Baal Shem Tov, but he didn't have access to them, and neither did the Alter Rebbe. Who was around the Alter Rebbe? They were all Ge'enim and Talmidei Chachamim. So you cannot say that Chassidus was simply only for those that so soon will be assimilated Jews who have no spiritual knowledge, or Torah knowledge, I should say, and therefore they need it. That for sure, that it will help them. But everybody now is in the same boat in that situation. You can say we're all in some ways assimilated, and all you have to look at is our relationship with Yiddishkeit. And Chassidus brings the neshama into it, brings life, fresh life into doing a mitzvah for any person, whether it's a person who doesn't know what mitzvahs are or a person who's been doing it all their lives. So in that sense, the mashal fits very well. Now the fact that some people who may be, you can say some people who may have been born in a observant, we'll say traditional home, I don't know what word to use exactly, affiliated home. So every word is loaded. But let's say a home where you knew what Torah mitzvahs is, you can say sometimes the coma is even deeper, because you think you have it all figured out. And it's not necessarily permeating the person. I'm not suggesting it's not a blessing to have, but the work that's needed, Aveda, to make it a primistic, a personal experience, Judaism, is a work that we all need, especially when you consider what it says in Tanya, what a Beinoni is. You know, you can learn your whole life Torah and mitzvahs, and still have the struggle, and still be a Beinoni, not a tzaddik. That's why you should always say, you have to always see yourself as a Beinoni, as he explains in chapter 13 and 13. And then when you look at what he speaks about in chapter 15, about the idea that you're not an Eved Hashem unless you do something that's outside of your habit, is that not fitting to every person? So you can be learning Torah 100 times, that's your custom. It's still somewhat of a comatose state unless you bring that 101 time to break the regillus, to change the pattern, to change the routine. We can go on, and everybody can look into their own heart and say, am I in a spiritually awakened and conscious state? Unless you're crying for the Geula and you feel that a lakus is missing in your life and you feel it constantly, yes, we're in a comatose state. We're asleep. And it doesn't matter how many Torah mitzvahs you do. Until you don't feel that Golus is a malady and that you really cannot live in this Golus one more moment, and you cry Ad Mosai, you can't sleep at night because the Geula is not here yet, and the Shchinta Begalusa. And people elsewhere suffer. So no matter how frum of a Jew you may be, if you don't feel that, that tells you you're in a comatose state. And the Tzimtzum Arishan took care of that to make sure that we all are somewhat in a comfort zone. You know, maybe it has its mileage that we don't go crazy, but it also, let's not convince ourselves that we're suddenly all there just because we're committed. So commitment is excellent. But there's a whole other story where where you're desperate because Golus is a malady and an illness, no different than a cancer, and you sense it. That's when you'll know you're not comatose. So Chassidus wakes us all up, both wakes us up in this darkness, the Der Yosem, this orphan generation, to bring that passion back, and also a taste of the Geula, and Ha'bahatalia, and it's interdependent, as the Rebbe explains. Okay, moving right along to the next question. Do you think it's really possible these days to do Hisbonenus that leads to Ava V'yira? Seems impossible. Okay. Well, being that HaTorah hi nitzchis, the Torah is eternal, and as the Alter Rebbe brings in the beginning of chapter 17 in Tanya, in the brackets, Torah hi nitzchis, which means Korav Elecha Dever Me'ed has to be Beficha B'Vavcha L'Seir, it means also today. So to say that things that are about Hisbonenus, that are brought in Torah in general, that a person should be Mizbeinen, Das Alekei Avicha, or Shavisi Hashem L'Negdi Samid, or the Hisbonenus that comes before davening, that Ein Adam, Ein Nispal El Metech Keved Reish, and all the explanations of what that means. That means Keved Reish, Shiflus, and Anivus, and all that entails. This is Nitzchi's dik idea, is to suggest that something is not relevant today, and you might as well say that the whole Torah is not relevant. The whole point of Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed, that pasuk, and the Alter Rebbe's tiny is to explain that they're all relevant today. So that's the first statement. The question is how. Imreiku mikemhu, as the Rebbe so often emphasizes, as the Gemara says. If imreiku, meaning if you don't have an answer, it's mikem, it's from you. We're lacking the answer. The fact that we are lazy, or the fact that we have distracted, or we have chosen to be more activists instead of sitting and learning, and Avedis Hashem, which is Vadtas Hashem Elekeichem, push at work. And Ezu Avedis Shebelev Zuhi Tfilah. What is the service of the heart? Service of the heart, Aveda, work. Ibud Eidus, as Chassidus says, like tanning leather. Hard work. This is part of Torah. And the fact that we may not choose it, that doesn't mean it's not relevant today. I'm the first to share that I think I'm guilty as anybody, so I'm not here to preach. I think we're all in the same boat. That, as I've said a number of times, davening b'chlal, Hisbonenus before davening, is somewhat of a lost art. I don't know if lost art is the right word, but the point is that it's an art. It's something that needs to be worked on. And the Rebbe never ever came and said, I'm replacing it with miftzayim, or with afotza, faratzta, shlichus, and so on. It was all part of one big picture. It's one Torah. The question is, what's the shot? Today, yes, the need is to go out and not just be a tzaddik in pelts, which means a tzaddik in a fur coat, and go out and warm the world around you. But together with that, doing it within a form of Aveda and learning Chassidus and Hisbonenus. So yes, the time has perhaps come that we should take this seriously ourselves and our children, and not in any way start dismissing it because whatever reason some person gave an excuse. And to recognize, yes, we need to have a form of Hisbonenus. It's called intellectual discipline, emotional intelligence, training ourselves. Yeah, maybe we're not capable of 6 hours of thinking Chassidus in a shot, but maybe 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. And you exercise these muscles. And they're not just a benefit because the Eibishter said so, it actually will help you in focus in your own life, focus in what matters. It'll create a certain vitality and energy, as I was discussing earlier. And I would say that we absolutely have to figure out ways to do it. Now, how's the simplest way? Chassidus tells us. Before you learn, before you daven, you learn a shtickl Chassidus. We don't have to come up with our own contemplations, our own Hisbonenus. You sit down with a maimer, a vedic maimer, a skoldic maimer, whatever it is, and you get your juices flowing. By what? By being challenged by an idea in a lakus that Chassidus talks about, whatever maimer it may be, and getting inspired by it, thinking about it, and then you have something to work with when you're davening. You take the particular tefillah. You don't have to do the whole davening. I'm saying you have to say the whole davening, but I mean the whole focus of kavanah. You can take Shema, you can take Psukei de Zimra, Baruch She'amar, different verses and different sections of tefillah that Chassidus explains, and apply what you just learned in a Hisbonenus way, not in a intellectual Hisbonenus, but like an emotional contemplation of putting yourself in that type of place. Chassidus explains hundreds of pages that talk about contemplating on the divine grandeur, contemplating on Yichud Eilah, Yichud Tata. So even if we may not be on the same level as the older Chassidim from the past were, but on our level, B'chol Ma'odcha, we're only asked to do something that is Ma'odcha, Ma'od of yours, more than you're doing till now. And Hisbonenus is definitely a part of it. And the simplest and easiest way is to take a shtickl maimer, anything from Chassidus, before davening and contemplating on it, aliba de nafshe, daita de nafshe, which means in a personal way, and how do you apply that? And I would even go and venture and say to people writing the essays, that's a form of Hisbonenus, because they're applying it. We're not just talking about writing theoretical, abstract essays. Take an essay, take an idea, apply it to your life. The best essays are the ones that are actually applied to a person's personal life. At the same time, grounded, of course, in the sources. So that's my short answer. If anybody would like to add a comment on that, by all means. I'll add one more thing to this I'd like to add, and that is the idea of emotional intelligence, which I alluded to before. The way you grow emotional intelligence is by Hisbonenus. Because as Chassidus explains, the best and healthiest midas are the ones that are born, nailed, they're born and birthed from the Hisbonenus, from a contemplation. There are natural midas that we have from birth, the way we're wired. We have also ava misoteres, hidden love, but the love that comes from an actual contemplation is the most guided and most harnessed type of emotion. Love and awe, I should add, ava and yira. So essentially, if you think about it from a therapeutic or psychological point of view, I'll talk from bein adam lechaveri, then we'll go back to bein adam lemokim, that when you work on in your mind, starting with a cognitive conditioning of trying to understand something, let's say, understand something about the divine grandeur, something that is greater than human. What happens is that it awakens, as Chassidus explains, first of all, midas shebeseichel, a certain intellectual excitement about an idea, about a concept, and that is nailed, gives birth to midas, not midas sichlias, but midas shebemidas, meaning actual emotion that you feel this is good for me. Intellectual excitement means the concept is good, and your mind says it's a valuable thing. Then you come to say it's valuable for me. So any type of therapeutic situation, any type of healing, whether it's in relationships or dealing with your own psychological issues, comes down to that type of cognitive conditioning that leads to an emotional maturity and emotional growth. So now you can apply that. Where does it begin? When you think about God in this way, in tefillah and davening, and you contemplate on the divine, and that in turn draws you to that transcendent state, and then you draw it into your life. Then by spills over and extends into the relationships you have with others. Okay, next question. Moving along to another topic, which is enforcing gender segregation. Completely new topic, as not following in any natural order of what we said till now. As an educator or parent, what is the best way to address a friendship between two young people from opposite genders? And one questioner elaborates, hi Rabbi Jacobson, I'll make the question short and to the point. I've been involved in chinuch of teenage boys for several years, and I found that one of the hardest things to deal with is when a boy has a friendship with someone of the other gender. It seems difficult both to address the issue to them and to succeed in getting the boy out of it more than many other challenges I've helped boys get over. What advice would you give regarding this issue, and what was the best way to tackle it? Okay, a very good question. I did not see any direct answer from the Rebbe to this, meaning to this specific question, even though there's a discussion about the whole matter in general. Let's first of all talk about segregation. In the secular world, we know boys and girls go to co-ed schools, boys and girls together, and it's very clear psychologically and emotionally, it's been documented by different studies, even secular studies, that the distraction of the sexual attraction between men and women, starting from the age of puberty or whenever people become teenagers, is definitely one that becomes a challenge on a daily basis and does not let a person necessarily fully develop their own identities before they're under the pressure of preening or attracting or getting the attention or competing in that so-called, we'll call it sexual arena. And when I mean sexual, I don't necessarily mean it in the literal sense. I mean in the attraction of opposite genders. Whereas in the yeshiva system, the Torah system, we separate men and women for the obvious reason, so they can focus completely on their own personal, spiritual, and religious development before they enter into that world. And we see that world as a holy world. Marriage is kedushin, kedusha. And there's nothing to be ashamed of and nothing ugly about it. But everything in its time. So instead of the way it is, in other words, just like everyone agrees that 3 or 4-year-olds are not ready to have an intimate relationship, an emotional relationship, the same is true with 13, 14, 15-year-olds. They're not ready yet, even though technically they can already be attracted to each other. So we believe and we see the positive side of it, that they each develop on their own, and that way a woman becomes a woman before she has to start that negotiation, so to speak, the social negotiation that exists in the world of genders. And the same thing with a man. And I'm speaking both in equal ways without getting into the distinctions here. So that is the basis of a segregated education in a very healthy way. Yes, there are people who criticize the element of that may cultivating a certain type of homophobia and other issues that come with genders being together. Fine, everything has its challenges, but nevertheless, if you have the Yiddish Shemayim and you have the awe of God and you have a healthy environment, not avoiding these issues but addressing them in a subtle and a modest fashion, this is the Torah way of doing things. Now, it's inevitable that a man will be attracted to a young man, may be attracted to a woman to a man, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. That's the way God created us. That's the way it works. However, if the education is preemptive and proactive, we can help people, young people, to deal with this, deal with their challenges when it comes to this area, and can be explained very intelligently and very positively. It doesn't have to be seen as something ugly, be ashamed of, to run away from. It's part of life. Everything beautiful in life has its time and its place and has to be harnessed and prepared for. So when it comes to a situation where, indeed, and the question here does not ask which type of school, I'm assuming we'll say it's a school where there is this segregation and there is that. The best possible way to do these things is not through anger or through punishment or through fear. Because remember, the attraction is coming from a natural place. So to tell someone this is something bad, they'll say, so well, why did God create us this way? The answer to that is God created it. The time will come that it's exactly what's necessary. Al Kain Yazav Adam is Isha's Beisei, or Adam is Beisei, as the pasuk says. Why? Because a man and woman, Zachar Nekeva Bara Esam, God created male and female, divine image, and they will search for each other, called soulmates, to reunite, to reconnect, in its time. That's the ultimate reason there is. So it's not to say to somebody that it's a bad thing, is planting a seed, which is absolutely not correct. You could say right now it's not for you. Just like when a soldier is fighting a war and they're and they're on the front line, that's not for them to start doing other things, including being attracted to the other gender. That's not what they're supposed to be doing there. Everything has its time. We're now in a stage when you're in the stage of study, of prayer, of building your arsenal, building your resources. So when you go out to the world, then you do that. Just like you tell to anybody, training. Training means you're not yet in a place where you're going out to battle, or you're ready to go perform surgery, or you're ready to go out into a job. You're still being training. That's what chinuch is. And when you're trained properly, then we can say, now you're going out to that world, the world of marriage, the world of sexuality, the world of healthy and holy and sacred relationship. So my suggestion would be, case by case, of course, is if you see a situation like that, is to have a heart-to-heart conversation, not in any critical way, not in any pointing fingers way, and just talk about life. Because the fact of the matter is, this will happen. It's not something. It's something that is not, that we can just determine is just going to ignore it. It will happen. The best way is a positive discussion on the topic. That's what I would recommend. And often you'll find that also when a person is bored and they don't have passion in what they're doing in their study, in this training, as I just described, then inevitably, what are they going to do? They're going to be drawn to things that are attractive to them, that are easy, that are pleasant, that make them feel good, and so on. So regardless, a good, healthy education is to fill people up with a life. Right now, we're in this stage of the game. Now we're not dating. Now we're in the process of building ourselves. So when you date, you'll date with much more richness, much more integrity, much more profound, much more intimate. So it's exactly that. And that's how I would explain it, of course, depending on the age. Now, if a situation persists, and you see a boy and girl being drawn to each other and hanging out with each other, I think it's a case by case again. I would be careful how to do it because you don't want them hiding and lying. You want to know what age it is so you know how to deal with it properly. But I think anything done when you deal with a Chassidic approach, a positive one, a healthy one, especially you share how you care, and the person sees that you're a caring person and you appreciate, and you're not just judging and just being negative and saying, how could you do this and all that, that usually people respond to, young people respond to far better. Is it perfect? We don't have a perfect world. We try our best. But this is the approach I would take when it comes to these matters. Okay. So we did that topic. Now, some follow-up. One about reward and punishment. So let's do that, which I discussed a few weeks ago. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I really love your Sunday and Wednesday classes as well as your meaningful Mondays. is referring to, besides Sunday, this series, which is every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., referring to Wednesday night, 8:15, 8:30. Every Wednesday I give a class in the city, which is also broadcast online, as well as Meaningful Mondays are short excerpts of thoughts, just for 2-3 minute excerpts. If you go to our website, meaningfullife.com, you can see the variety of offerings that you can feel free to pick from, choose from, what things that you can customize to your own needs. You can even actually create your own page. We upgraded overhauled our entire site. You can actually customize a page to just receive the content you're interested in. So if it's parenting or dealing with challenges or dealing with any particular issue, you can have a page. You come there and you have your profile and your particular needs, and it's constantly being updated on a daily basis. All the new stuff and other stuff that we will choose for you based on your preferences. So you can do all that at meaningfullife.com. Go to the home page and you'll see the details. So just reading on here, I'm totally hooked, and I've hooked many others as well. Your talks are so inspiring, full of good advice, and more than all, so practical and relevant to our daily lives. You mentioned last Wednesday. Okay, so this was a Wednesday class. I recall also speaking about it, actually, one of the MyLife episodes. How reward and punishment, when given by Hashem, are not to be seen just as that, rather more as cause and effect. Correct. Please explain how this goes along with all the references in the Torah, such as Kel Nishkamis Hashem and the likes. There are many such descriptions about Hashem, and I was wondering how you would interpret them. What I was referring to there, and I believe also in some of the episodes of MyLife, is that Shalah has a lengthy discussion about schar and einish, reward and punishment in the Torah. Some say it's zguli. Zguli means there's no direct correlation between your action and the reward. And some say it's siba mesubov, cause and effect. Similar to how the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Lamed Zayin and Tanya, schar mitzvah, mitzvah. That the mitzvah itself is its reward, because the mitzvah leads. So Maseinu v'Avedisenu, when we do our work in refining this material world, that's not a zgula. That itself is a building block and a piece of geula and a piece of Mashiach. And when that accumulates, you have the full-blown geula, which is essentially the consensus, the way Chassidus explains schar ve'enish. So it may have elements of zgula, but fundamentally, it's cause and effect. So when a person does something in a certain way, the effect is just like you put your hand in fire, it gets burned. When you do a mitzvah, it makes you a healthier person. When you do, God forbid, an aveda, it makes you unhealthier. It's like damaging to your soul. So no different than toxic food and healthy food. Toxic air and unhealthy and healthy air. That's why we say that Mach mitzvah Sissa, the 248 positive mitzvahs correspond to the 248 limbs. The 365 negative mitzvahs correspond to the Shas ha'leisaseh, correspond to Shasa Gidim, to the 365 glands, nerves, however you translate it. Sefer Charedim, entire book, discusses how mitzvahs correspond to different parts of the being. It's not just a zgula, it means that when you use your eyes, the way the Torah says, your eyes become healthier. You use your mind to study Torah, your mind becomes healthier. You use your heart to give tzedakah and be charitable, your heart becomes stronger. Chosh b'reishei, the Gemara says, someone has a headache, they should learn Torah. Chosh b'raglei, someone has a foot ache, they should study Torah. Chassidus explains, Svarim explain, because every part of the body corresponds to another part of the Torah. So when you study that part of the Torah, it heals that part of your body because it's evolving from that part of the Torah. Zes Sefer tell the Sodom, Zes HaTorah, Adam, a human being, is like the Torah. The Torah corresponds to each part of the body. Why is it what we learn Torah, we don't necessarily get healed in that part, as that everyone said in the Fabring with a smile, because we don't know which part corresponds with which. So you have to learn Kol HaTorah Kol every time you have a headache. Imagine. And it will ultimately heal. So essentially, Siba Mesubov. All the statements that you have, God was jealous, God was angry, God punished, these are not to be meant in anthropomorphic ways. Sifrei Chkira, starting from Meir Nevuchim and other Svarim, all talk of Meir Nevuchim, the guard of the perplexed of the Maimonides, talk about this. But the Chassidus explanation for it all is it's all Torah Dibra B'Lashon B'nei Adam. The Torah speaks in the language of a human being, so we should relate to it. God gets angry. How could God get angry? God is not human. God gets jealous, envious. These are words that when you understand them properly, you realize it's again cause and effect. God's anger, what is anger? Anger is detachment. When you get detached, when a Jew does something that detaches himself from God, so God, in a sense, detaches from him. We've detached it. As the Rebbe explains in a number of places, your avenus, your sins separate you between God. But the separation is only in one way. Koshalai pridaschem. You're separate. It's not pridasenu. So essentially it's cause and effect. Because of our sins, we were exiled. When we displace ourselves spiritually, you've already designated your own. I don't want to use the word punishment. The effect that you brought upon yourself. When you hurt someone you love, even if they don't know it, you've already created something that has severed that love. So it's not a punishment; it's a cause and effect, and all the interpretations can be defined that way. I'd have to go into more specifics, but nothing is outside of this realm that I just described. Mitzvah comes from the word tzafse v'chibur, connection. Aveda comes from what? Havoda mireshus l'reshus, disconnection, displacement, alignment, and disalignment. So just like when we eat healthy foods, we exercise, we connect our bodies to a healthy source of diet, healthy source of nutrition, that makes us healthier, allows the blood to flow. When you disconnect, you take something, God forbid, something that's toxic, something that is polluted, something that is hurtful, it disconnects. The same thing is spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically to Torah and mitzvahs. Meaning it's a direct result of the following the guidelines brings those blessings. The fact that sometimes we don't see it immediately is because of Golus. So there's certain filters, there's certain layers that distort, don't allow the flow to completely be seamless because of the different reasons. But it doesn't mean it's ever in vain. As we learned before, everything has a tailus and everything will ultimately yield what it has to yield. There's also a question about the Hanochos and the Sichas of the Rebbe, which I would like to take more time to address. So I apologize, and I will talk about this in the following episode. So in order to do justice to it, more questions about the process. And I want to just speak quickly. Obviously, I had personal experience in this, so I'll be happy to share the process which so many people are intrigued with, especially questions like how when the Rebbe spoke, why is it sometimes the sichos seem so different from the original when you look at the tape, or you look at the original, how it was first said. I'll discuss that and some other matters, some interesting tidbits, maybe some things that have not been shared before for the public. So please stay tuned. But because of the limited time, I decided I'll move that to the next episode. So let's go to the Chassidus Question of the week, and then to the MyLife essays. Okay, Chassidus Question of the week is, what is the difference between aspaklarya meirah and aspaklarya she'eino meirah? And what is the practical application to our lives today? I have seen aspaklarya meirah translate as a transparent magnifying glass. Is this correct? Okay. So let's begin with, again, the sources. Aspaklarya meirah, aspaklarya she'eino meirah is actually a Gemara in Yevamos that talks about the difference between the nevuah, the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the prophets of the other prophets. Sometimes the expression is that Moshe Rabbeinu was misnava b'zeh, which means he prophesied by saying, this is it, zeh, like pointing your finger, maraba, it's boy zeh. And the other prophets prophesied with koi amar Hashem, like a chofadimin, it's like this. And that the Gemara this designates as the difference between aspaklarya meirah, Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy, and aspaklarya she'eino meirah, which is the prophecy of the other prophets. So in Chassidus, this is explained in several places. I'll give you some sources, which I will cite and somewhat explain, or at least briefly explain. Firstly, let's start with Torah Miketz. Maimer Miketz, a Maimer, I believe it's a Chanukah Maimer. Let me just make sure. Tanu Rabbanan Mitzvahs Ner Chanukah, page 33A and B, I believe. Yeah, in Torah, that Torah of the Alter Rebbe. So there he explains it, and it actually explains it with simple terms. I'll give you a few other sources, and I'll go into the explanation. Likutei Torah Nitzavim 47C, Drushim L'Shmini Atzeres, also Likutei Torah 92:2, the bottom of the page, Shir Hashirim 23, and Shir Hashirim 28b. 30, I should say, Shir Hashirim 20c and 28b. Also, the Maimorim Admur Zaken Ktsarim, the short Maimorim that was said mostly before Peterburg, page 143, and Tovkuf Ayin Aleph, the Maimorim Admur Zaken, the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, page 24 and on. And they're all collected, a lot of material is collected in Sefer Lakutim of the Tzemach Tzedek, which I also had the honor to work on. The Erech, the entry on aspaklarya meirah and aspaklarya she'ena meirah. And there are many citations cited. So what does he say in Parsha Miketz, in Torah Ed? Without reading it all in detail, he basically says the difference is between aspaklarya meirah seems to be the difference between a glass, a pane of glass, aspaklarya being like a glass that you can see through. And aspaklarya she'ena meirah, he says specifically, is a spiegel, a mirror. So it's also a glass. But the words here like this are like this. That aspaklarya meirah is like this, is schuchis habihira, which means a transparent or illuminated glass, through which which you can see from distance directly the light that shines through. On the other hand, aspaklarya she'ena meirah, let's just go with how he translates. He says, Hu hanikra spiegel, that's called a mirror. Dahainu sheyesh mosach v'kisui alas chuchis. There's some type of veil and covering on the glass, which we know is silver. Aval hamosach einu dover av, but this veil is not thick, so which would completely conceal, but allows, it's dak v'kolosh, it means it's thin and basically almost very amorphous. He says clearly it's spread with silver. Well, that's why when you look through it, you see the reflection exactly, but it's a reflection. That's how he distinguishes it. I believe Maimorim Ktsarim, if I may cite it, Maimorim Ktsarim, he actually uses another word in Yiddish on page 143. It's nikra spiegel, and nikra b'lashon widerschein. A widerschein means a reflection. Now, interestingly, the Tzemach Tzedek, let me look for it, actually brings also a Yiddish word for the aspaklarya meirah. What is the expression used? Anikra spektiva, belaz. Spektiva, in Yiddish we say glasses, for example. Our glasses are called spakulen. So spektiva is seeing something directly through a glass, as opposed to then spiegel would be aspaklarya she'ena meirah. So there you have it. It's the simple translation would be a pane of glass, which is a meirah, and a mirror, which is not see-through, it's a reflection. Actually, in the Maimonides Chassidus says that there's a meirah, there's an advantage of aspaklarya she'ena meirah because you can see yourself and you can see behind you. But that's not for now. That's already the meirah of chozer over yosher, over so-called the rebound light, the refractive light over the direct light, like the power of the moon over the sun. But that's not the discussion here. So that's the difference, and the difference in Ruchnius, obviously, is that you can see something directly as is. It's still through a glass, but you're seeing the object. In some places it says it's like eyesight. So when you see an image of something, you're actually seeing the thing. Now the thing is not in your eye. So it's not like you're experiencing the actual thing, you're seeing the actual thing. Zeh. And then when you see it in a mirror, you say, it's like this, like a replica, like a model. And that's like seeing it through a mirror. And of course there can be lower levels as well. In each of these, there's levels, which is also not for now. And Chassidus talks about the different levels, including an ayin beis. Now, let's talk about this magnifying element. So yes, indeed, if you look into those of us that learned about Mitzvah Maimer translated into Yiddish, we'll see that in some of the Yiddish translations, there's an expression, aspaklarya meirah, a leichtendike vergrößerungsglas, a bright or transparent magnifying glass. And indeed, that's how it was initially translated. If you know the Haggadah of Haskama Tanya, the Haskama from Rab Yehuda Halevi, so that Yehuda Kayin, so he says there the expression Ish Elikim Kodesh Retoyer, Aspaklarya Meirah, he's referring to the Alter Rebbe. And when they initially translated it into, when the Shiurim on Motzei Shabbos and Tanya, they said, the leichtendike Vergrößerungsglas, was macht jede Sache auf zu gucken, lichtig und größer. And the Rebbe, when he edited, he wrote, Chash v'sholem har ze hepech hakavona. And I can't read the next word. I have to make that out. Hepech hakavona. Why is it hepech hakavona? Because that would be suggesting that Moshe Rabbeinu was seeing something in an exaggerated way. So the Rebbe then translated, crossed out the words vergresserungs. He left leichtendike, gloss, and laut lichtig, he says, was macht jede Sach, not auszugucken. Jede Sach, was macht jede Sach lichtig und offen lichtig mit der voller Leiterkeit oder Lichtigkeit. Ukridu ha-chidush das aspaklarya meirah rei yevomes, the Rebbe zeichnet the yevomes, the chidush of Moshe Rabbeinu, v'nis bar barucha, b'mailas Moshe Rabbeinu bezen, the Rambam Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, Perek Zayin, and he goes on, Meir Nevuchim, Chelik Bey, Pirush HaMishnayos, and of course in Chassidus. So the Rebbe clearly rejects the concept of a vergression, oiskuken. That the whole point of his klima is that you're seeing the thing more real, not less real. To say it's exaggerated and blown up is true. It's greater than, but it's not the real thing. Aspaklarya she'eina meirah is a reflection. But aspaklarya meirah is only a malyusa, not a chesar. So that's how the Rebbe corrects it, and absolutely not magnifying. However, for preempting a follow-up question, in some Maimorim, it does say, and the Tzemach Tzedek brings this in Shir HaShirim, Eira Torah Shir HaShirim, page 351, 352. He says clearly the following words: Aspaklarya meirah yesh chuchis teva is a very good glass, or you could say a quality glass. Shimares hadover hanira godel yeser mekamoishuhu bekiflei kaflayim le'en shir. That shows something bigger than it is, double and even greater without limits. It should look bigger or big to the person who's looking through this glass. So from this is mashma clearly that it is like a magnifying glass. And he says that in those pages in Shir HaShirim. However, if you read closely, you'll see that he does not say that. Because he actually asks a question. If that's the case, then everything should look bigger by aspaklarya, meaning it's not that way. He says that the point Godel here means that the Torah emphasizes, when you look through the eyes of Torah, hashkifim mein kotchacha, you see things for the way they are. So even something that would be seen for regular people as small, the Torah shows you the greatness of it. So it's not an exaggerated, it's showing you the reality of the greatness of every small thing, very consistent with the Rebbe's Taich. So it could be the translators took it from this Maimer, which I believe is also in the Kut Torah Shir HaShirim, and misunderstood as being a magnifying glass. No, it's a glass that sees it bigger, meaning bigger from the way we distortedly see it smaller. And you can look it up yourself to understand this further. Enough on this topic. Let's go over to the essays. The essays are 3 essays again. One is Think Positive in Hebrew by Mendy Lefkivker Haifa Eretz Yisrael. Okay. And this is basically one of the more popular themes in many essays, Traggut V'Zaingut, where he, in a very beautiful way, sums it up. Everything is in your head, he says. And basically, all our attitudes change, affect our way of looking at life. And Chassidus teaches us how to look at things in a positive way by thinking differently. He goes on to ask some questions on the famous story of Traggut V'Zaingut, why the Tzemach Tzedek didn't give any others guli, just said think good and will be good, and compares it to other situations where you see advice was given. But the bottom line is how thought changes reality. That's the central theme, and the Rebbe's attitude consistent also with when he changed and said hospitals shouldn't be called Beis Chelim, a house of the ill, but Beis Reifim, a house of the healing or the healers. And more details in that aspect. This and other essays can be seen on our website, meaningfullife.com/essays, or if you subscribe to our weekly email, you can get in your inbox the new essays. The second essay, Self-Identity by Shlomo Gutnick, age 27, Kollel in Manhattan. Okay, this essay is written in a dialogue between a rabbi and a student, about how a student writes about how he's struggling to understand who he is, his identity and his direction in life. and talks about himself in this negative sense and doesn't know how to get beyond it. And the teacher and the rabbi responds that commending him for his honesty, but then going and describing that that's exactly what you need to realize is that it's a good thing to discover your identity, and basing on Tanya, realizing that we have two identities. One is the nefesh elokis, one is the nefesh abamis. And it's important that a person for the rest of their lives always struggle with this, come to realize and not make the grave and paralyzing mistake, as he says, that you get stuck and trapped by the negative stuff, and realize that you are actually two parts, and the real you, the real identity, is the soul, which is your real operating system. He speaks about the two operating systems, the animal soul and the divine soul, and how they struggle with each other. But once we understand what we are, we can begin to understand who we are and understand our true identity. So he puts in context the whole animal, divine soul in context of identity, search of identity. So that's interesting and valuable. And then third essay is, again in Hebrew, Iskafia, the Key to Modern Man's Problems, by Chaim Sasson, age 57, lecturer and author of 8 books, Beitar Illit, Israel. And essentially goes through how Iskafia, the idea of self-control and restraint, is critical in life discipline, across the board. Of course, the concept of self-control, meirah shal ta'alev, and obviously uses Tanya as the basis of this discussion. And we're seeing it also today in the diet fads, all about restraint, all about discipline, all about self-control. The key to all forms of happiness in life. And ultimately what causes a person to truly be happy and content. Brings many different sources, and this too can be seen, as I said, meaningfullife.com/essays. And with that, we conclude this episode for 104 of MyLife Chassidus Applied. And again, reminding everyone there's a few more days to this essay contest of this year, 2016, Tov Shenayin Vov, Shnas Hakel, the 150 years from the Tzemach Tzedek's Histalkus, Yud Gimel Nissen Tov Reish Chavov, now we're in Tov Shenayin Vov. May everyone be matzliach in the essay contest, and may our efforts, and even the beginning of our efforts, Tarim Yikrov Ani Ena, as the Rebbe would say, even before we call out, God answers with the Geula Amitis Vashlema, as Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, Emasai Kosimar, when will you come? When the wellsprings themselves of Chassidus will be spread and disseminated outward. And outward means applying it to our lives, our real daily lives, and the struggles we go through, in the pleasures we have, in every area of life, to be infused with the direction and guidance, seeing it through the lens of Chassidus. So I encourage you again and again to participate in this contest. You cannot win if you don't enter. And it's really geared and engineered in a way that make it as equally possible to anyone who applies themselves to do this, to actually win. And we're all winners because the process itself, as I said, is schar mitzvah that will bring the geula amitis v'ashlema, which is your futza meinesecha chutza. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 104. Until next week, everyone should have a simcha dika chedesh adar as the days pass. Mailim b'kedesh, we only grow in our joy. Simcha b'tev hanira v'hanigla. Be well.